Hey everyone, today I want to talk about why people cannot get jobs in finance. And just to clarify, this is separate from people who, for example, I talk to and they say, I ask them, okay, how many jobs have you applied to? And they say like two, five, seven, 10, or whatever it may be, 15 jobs. That's a separate issue. People who, for example, they just don't put in the effort or the time, that's a different thing. Of course, like getting internships from earlier in your career was going to help you. But the number one thing for people who already are trying to get jobs in finance in college, and I talk to like in networking, for example, on LinkedIn, and they cannot get these jobs. They're trying really hard. They know what to study, the technicality, and it's really just not being part of that in crowd, which is determined by the vernacular you use and the practices that you have. So I think this intangible thing, a lot of times, unfortunately, is best illustrated with a lot of people I see trying to get into the industry that are from India, actually from the country. And part of it is just like difference of culture, where the way that they speak and talk it sounds like they're trying to be overly polite, and it comes across as a little bit desperate and trying too hard, and it feels a bit overwhelming. Like they're trying to say thank you a lot, like overly, as if you're doing them such a huge favor. A lot of times, just I've noticed as part of the culture, they interrupt you a lot in conversation. And it's not like a to say stuff that's material, it's just to acknowledge what you're saying, like just these little tonality things. And honestly, just talking with a lot of these people, you don't feel like they're one of your peers in the workplace that you could potentially be working with. It comes across more of like they're a fan, almost to say. And of course, it's not exclusive to them, but this is just, I think, an extreme example of a very different culture that illustrates why a lot of people just in general aren't able to get into finance, into high finance. And this is true for people. There's also little things about knowing how to be in the industry and use the correct vernacular that just people who, are very cool people to talk to as well. But for example, some of them might not know that you have to send thank you letters or thank you emails after every interview. And that's just an automatic disqualifier. A lot of companies hiring people, hiring managers, they'll just disqualify the person that doesn't send a thank you email, which is just, if you don't know that, the basics of that, there's also the risk that you don't know these other things that are very valuable. So when it comes to why is this vernacular thing such a big issue? Well, part of it is the risk, but also part of it is they just don't want to really work with nerds, to be frank. I was in advanced classes with a lot of these basically nerds in school my whole life, and honestly, it is a bit unbearable. In college, I tried taking a data structures class within the computer science school, and I dropped it. Where like the first class, the teacher was making a joke about a Chromebook, like not even really being a computer, and I didn't even understand what a Chromebook was. I just knew how to code, and that's all I cared about. But their sort of in crowd in computer science was more nerdy, it felt like. And just the way like a lot of the students, especially the Indian students, laugh, like like covering their mouth, like hunched over, just ugly laugh. And it was just saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that roast on a Chromebook." And I was just looking around like, "Are you guys serious? This is like the savage moment for you." I may have been like that as a kid, but I think the harsh social life in the US has made me aware of what I look like to others. Like my brother would sometimes say, "Oh, you make these really ugly faces." And then when someone else made a face, I would realize it and think, "Oh, wow, I might look like that." Maybe worse, and started putting more effort into and being more socially aware. And I think US culture does that very well, where it makes people much more socially apt than other countries. And for another example, China, which is a country that's very successful with themselves, like domestically, still they usually maintain more of the mathematical nerdy positions within finance, which is fine. I mean, the quant position is the highest paying position, salaried position really in the world. When you look at some of the base salaries and bonuses that people get straight out of college, most being $1 million base salary straight out of college for Citadel as one example. But for example, when I was in China, I went to a Goldman Sachs recruitment event at Fudan University, which is one of the top universities in the world. And they were teaching students how to answer behavioral questions. In the US, this would be a minimum requirement and something that the school would prepare you for, not the actual recruiters from the company. And for me, it was almost laughable that they're like, the company is teaching these potential candidates how to answer their questions. Yeah, from the school teaches that stuff, but and you kind of learn that over time. But then once you get time to talk to the actual company for networking events, like you have to already know that stuff. The school wouldn't want to put you in front of those recruiters unless you're already able to present yourself correctly and answer questions. Like a typical STAR method for answering behavioral questions, situation, you describe the situation, the task for T, your action that you took for A, and then R is the result, star. So that's just like something that needs to be known. But in China, it was like not known to just answer behavioral questions like that. And the reason for this, it's a way, it may sound elitist. I think each sort of industry does have their in-crowd sort of thing of what the way they operate, but it really is a way to weed out the people who are legit and not legit. Or maybe a better way to say it is for people who are really immersed in that industry. Because using acronyms like when I saw a job posting on Twitter from a very popular account in the real estate world, when I messaged the account to see what the position would pay and the requirements, etc., I would use acronyms like REAP, REPE, or real estate private equity, TC for total comp, FIG for financial institutions group, which is where I worked. And it was a way for me I just did it like subconsciously, but when I psychoanalyze it, I realized that I was really trying to see if this person understands the industry, best practices, etc. Because if you're in the finance real estate industry and you don't know the common acronyms, I'm going to not trust that you also know the best practices in the industry too, where I can learn from or where you can make money from. And this could be something like, for example, if there's a former managing director from Goldman Sachs, they would know certain things in the industry. Like, for example, general partner protections when forming a fund, LP redemptions and restrictions you work into the contract, ways to get the cheapest financing, like utilizing affordable housing to subsidize your other real estate opportunities. Like, I would want someone who I trust knows all these things, where I can't be vetting that they know everything, but just knowing that they understand the vernacular is like a base level requirement. And it's the same thing for candidates too. A hedge fund doesn't want to hire someone who then is suggesting they use like simple moving averages to day trade. They will look at you like you just suggested you should sell like naked calls on a stock that someone on Reddit just posted about. They'll immediately be thinking in their head, like before they respond, how can they fire you within a week without getting sued? They're looking for something more aligned with just something more like using reverse DNS data to track email traffic flows between two companies that announce a merger to price the likelihood of that merger falling through, whether there's sharp spikes or a complete stopping of email traffic in order to do merger arbitrage. Or for a quantitative trading candidate, using mathematical principles to predict when large orders in a certain direction are likely to be placed within the next few seconds and get in front of the trade flows, perhaps using unique order types that the firm has created with a major exchange. So I already mentioned the example of my friend doing everything right, but just not sending thank you emails. And it just tells them that he's not like corporate. He mentioned he spoke with a lady who was the CEO of JP Morgan in that same conversation that I was having with him about why he was struggling. And I say, you mean Jamie Dimon? And he didn't know who that was. It turns out, it was the CEO of JP Morgan's asset and wealth management division he spoke with when I dug in deeper and I tried looking around. But you may think it's like unrelated, but a person who is immersed in the industry will, one, know how to send thank you emails, and two, know who Jamie Dimon is. And you might think, who cares, right? But the firm cares, because imagine he's working at a financial firm and is in a meeting with a client. And a lot of times before in Zoom, the meeting actually starts, people are chit-chatting, and the client says like something about how Jamie Dimon said something in the news. And this friend doesn't know who they're discussing. Like, the client's just going to think he's a dumbass and wonder how the financial firm has employees who don't know who Jamie Dimon is, right? Or imagine worse if he says he met the CEO and says she was a nice lady. right? Even though, of course, the CEO is a man, not a woman. It'd be more embarrassing for the company he works for. And I talk with CEOs of companies, and sometimes we connect with clients through these small talk and recent developments in industries, what big people said recently. And sometimes they'll ask, "Oh, did you hear about what XYZ said?" And saying, "No, I didn't hear it," it's fine. But it's not fine saying, "Who is that?" when it's like the CEO of the largest bank in the country. So someone immersed in the industry will know these things about what happens. Like they'll also just know other things, like if interest rates rise, how that affects bond prices, how that may affect our clients' decisions about raising money, what they do with like their securities portfolios in a rising interest rate environment, etc. And if someone just doesn't know the basics, there's a much higher chance they're also unaware of these technical things as well, which are really vital. So, similar to how if you have spelling mistakes in your resume or cover letter, they'll not consider you for the application. It doesn't really matter, right? But it's just an easy way to weed out the dangerously careless candidates or people who might just not get that you need to at least get the fundamentals down. Because if there's weakness in your fundamentals, then there's going to be weaknesses elsewhere too. And remember, this is not a measurement of anyone's intelligence. Like the smartest person I know personally in my life who's able to predict that like the rolling cost of futures, of oil futures in an ETF were because the market was trading in contango, it would send the ETF to zero because the rolling costs were too high. And he wasn't able to get a job in finance in America. This is a guy who's very smart, smarter than me by far. But it was just because he lived in a different country for about a decade and didn't really naturally absorb the corporate vernacular entrenched in high finance. Another example is he would say a currency is inflating or deflating as opposed to depreciating or appreciating, which he thought made no difference and would say, "Oh, you get what I'm saying." I understood in the conversation, but there is a difference between these two things, and it would be confusing in an FX desk if people are using this conflicting language, and it could be very dangerous when a lot of money is being traded. Basically, in summary, a lot of people, they network, they know to have a good resume, they wear suits and business casual, and they'll reach out right on LinkedIn and set up calls and whatnot, and they know to do the right things, they know who to apply to, but they just don't have the corporate sort of vernacular entrenched in their culture. Like it really is a corporate America really is a culture, just like any country's a culture. It's like a subculture. And a lot of people just don't get that because they haven't been immersed in the environment enough. They don't know the acronyms, the biggest players, the people to use, and a lot of it they just don't speak the same way. They might not sound like a cool person to talk to that you would want to work with. And it's like you can't be talking to a client as if you're a big fan of them or something like that. You need to talk to them like, "Oh, we're both professionals." So it's two things. One of it is just not understanding all of the things that need to be said. And another part of it is just coming across as nerdy, as the simplest way to put it. They just don't speak like a professional. They'll just be like, "Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and all this." And you want to work with your peers. You don't want to work with a fan. I think that's a simple way to say it. So there's kind of two parts to it, but that's honestly a thing that I see holding people back the most that have all the other boxes checked, honestly. And it's hard to fix that, but you just have to recognize these people aren't above you and just treat yourself with the same respect as you treat them and really spend the time to get immersed in the culture of corporate America, of high finance. And I'll make a video on how to do that and how to really sound legitimate in a separate video. So another example that I also wanted to mention was a friend of mine who actually went through the interview process at Goldman Sachs and got a position. And it was interesting because she went through her initial interview and spoke with someone there, essentially a recruiter. And she said, "Hey, listen, I know that you weren't prepared like most of our candidates are for the interview questions and how to answer them, but you were able to perform very well with the questions at hand. And I want to help prepare you. I think that you have a good head on your shoulders. So I want to prepare you." So it's interesting at first that they were like, "Oh, everyone else was prepared and she wasn't." So she didn't realize how serious it was until she actually got the job. And Goldman Sachs, for example, in the Bay Area, they only recruit at like Stanford, they only recruit at specific schools. So I actually went to Stanford to see one of their recruiting events because they didn't recruit at the universities that I attended. And when my friend got the job, actually, she was speaking to other interns and they were like, "Oh, so who helped you get the position?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" Basically, everyone there had just assumed you wouldn't have gotten the position unless someone helped you. And they were like, "Oh, this person who's currently working here, and this alumni, whatever it may be." And she realized like everyone got prepared for their Goldman Sachs interviews. They were told what answers to provide. And she was like the only one who like had started to get that in the interview process. Everyone else had been given that prior, where their schools prepared them and told them exactly what to say beforehand. It's this very strong relationship between the university and the actual workplace where they have these connections. And if you're not at a university that has those connections, then you just don't get that preparation. And it's like specific answers that they're looking for, even if you know a lot about finance. So that just goes to show you that there is a lot of the in-crowd mentality. And another example for even a micro example where it's not even in the workplace yet, whereas at one of the universities I attended, there was an investment club, which was just two people at the front of the class talking to others, basically doing teachings 1 hour a week. And they would have presentations and whatnot, or maybe it was 2 times a week. And I noticed that there was also a fund on campus, right, that managed actual money. It was much more prestigious. The investment club, anyone could show up, but the fund, you had to apply and go through networking events and interviews with other students, upperclassmen, like networking events with them. And I noticed that for the investment club, there was these people that would show up each week and they would be learning. And then there was two people who were co-presidents of the club that ran it. And when it came time for voting who the next president was going to be for the next school year, they did it the week after Thanksgiving, where the attendance was by far the lowest. Usually, most meetings, there would be maybe 40 people or whatever it may be in the auditorium. And this one, there was like 5 people that I would see at the other meetings. But then up at the front row, there was a bunch of people I'd never seen in the meetings before, but they were all in the investment fund. It was very interesting. And then they said, "Okay, who are we going to vote?" And there was 2 people from the investment fund who went to the front and ran for president. And I'm like, they haven't even attended one meeting. And then all of these people from the investment fund that came over and were in the front row, like there was like maybe 12 of them, they all just voted for their one friend. And basically, it was a way for the investment fund to improve the resumes of their members so that their members can get better jobs. And then they can also boast, like, "Oh, within our student fund, 99% or 100% of our members graduate to get these positions." So they're improving their own statistics, you could say. The university would almost. And they were basically just it was very obvious. They just decided within the fund, okay, who within our fund should be president next of the investment club. And then they said, "Okay, these 2 people, we're all going to go to the investment club for the first time the day that they vote. And then we're just going to vote you in as president." And they chose obviously the week when there was the least amount of students there because everyone was at home for Thanksgiving and whatnot. They did it like the Monday after Thanksgiving, I think. It was very bizarre. And I realized that there are many in crowds, within finance. And if you're not part of the in crowd, then it's extremely tough to succeed. Obviously, I've been able to succeed myself, and many others can too, but there's certain scenarios where it certainly pays off to be in certain areas and like at a certain school or within a certain club. It can have very helpful benefits. I ended up transferring universities and became president of the investment club at a different university. But if I was at my original university, that never would have been the case. Yeah, just another few examples of times where finance is much of an in crowd, as I'm sure all industries have, but I think in finance specifically, it's extremely the case.